What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Ttsp Sports Podcast. This is part 3 of today's show, live from Buffalo, New York. Today is Monday, May 22nd. Damn, this month is going by fast. This 2017 year is going by fast. And on to the next one. It is sports talk time. It is, more importantly, UFC sports talk time on the Thomas Take All MMA show today, Monday, May 22nd. This is the Thomas Double Take. Sunday's episode did very, very well yesterday. Thank you all for tuning into that, and thank you all for tuning into this today. So let's get right to it. UFC 212 will take place June 3rd in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, featuring Jose Aldo Jr. versus Max Halloway for the UFC featherweight title. Let's go back to the beginning. December 2015, December 2015, the long-awaited Conor McGregor versus Jose Aldo fight for the UFC featherweight title took place. Conor knocked out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds. One-punch knockout. Aldo loses his title. Conor, the newly minted UFC featherweight champion, and Conor McGregor decides to move up a weight class, take on Rafael dos Anjos. Meanwhile, Jose Aldo is forced to fight Frankie Edgar at UFC 200. But Rafael dos Anjos got hurt, and then Conor had to fight Nate Diaz once and twice. And during all that, UFC 202 was the second time Conor would fight Nate Diaz again. And in victory, they finally gave him that shot versus Eddie Alvarez. So once that was won in November, it's crazy, sorry. Once it was won in November, they decided to basically strip Conor McGregor of his UFC featherweight title, being that he did not defend it for a total of a year, did not defend that belt. So here we are. UFC, I believe it was UFC 206, in which Daniel Cormier was set to take on Anthony Johnson, and Cormier was injured. Actually, it was UFC 208. Anthony Johnson was injured and pulled out of the fight, or Cormier pulled out of the fight. Cormier pulled out of the fight, and the UFC decided we're going to promote from within. The co-main event is going to be the interim featherweight title, and if we're making the co-main event for the interim featherweight title, being that we already made an interim title with Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar, that means Jose Aldo will be promoted from the interim champion to the UFC featherweight champion. So Jose Aldo is now the champion of the UFC. Conor did decide to take the time necessary to get back in the win column versus Nate Diaz, and in doing so, the UFC had to move on from Conor as a UFC featherweight. I never thought that Conor would fight at the featherweight division again. I always thought that he would never... Let me rephrase that. I always thought that he would never fight in the UFC featherweight division once he defeated Jose Aldo the way that he did, and the fashion that he did. I always thought that he would never come back to the featherweight division, and I was right. Now he's setting himself up for a super fight versus Floyd Mayweather. So crazy how much can change from December of 2015 to May of 2017. What can change in that short time span in the wide world of combat sports, and that was what happened. So here we are, Aldo versus Halloway for the unified, undisputed UFC featherweight championship, where Aldo is the champion, Max Halloway is the interim champion. So from December 2015 to June 3rd of 2017, Jose Aldo will be back where he was back on December 15th of 2015, where he was the UFC featherweight champion, defending his belt against the interim champion. Let's hope, for his sake, that he can defend it versus the interim champion again. But I want to give a brief rundown of how I see the fight going down. Max Halloway is a straight-up killer. Max Halloway has won 9 consecutive fights since his last loss to Conor McGregor. Both of these fighters' last losses were to Conor McGregor. Max Holloway's, 3-4 years ago, Aldo the before mentioned December of 2015. So that's why this fight is very intriguing to see how these guys can further elevate themselves out of the picture of that loss. Can Aldo keep his belt? Can Max Holloway rise above Jose Aldo and be a new wave fighter in the UFC featherweight division? Both fighters have everything to lose, and it'll be a very interesting fight. Besides that, the card is not that entertaining, and that is what sucks. I would have really liked to have seen a more entertaining card put on display for the UFC fans. Claudia Gadelha versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz will be on that card. That in itself is a great fight, but I was really hoping that they would make this card much, much better than what they did. So the narrative is really only Aldo versus Max Holloway. Max Holloway, obviously the bigger man, fights longer. Anthony Pettis was his last fight, and he completely dispatched Anthony Pettis. Pettis is a little bit bigger than Jose Aldo. So Max Holloway will definitely have the size advantage, definitely have the reach advantage. I don't see Holloway spending his entire career as a UFC featherweight either. So that in itself, Jose Aldo has shown in his last loss that the size, the agility, the reach advantage that Conor had in that fight was just enough to put him over the top in 13 seconds versus Jose Aldo. Those punches that Aldo usually lands, the hooks, Conor wasn't even there. He stepped back, threw that left hand, and down went Aldo. So if Aldo fights smart, uses his distance, uses his leg kicks, which are some of the best in the sport, I think he can win. Similarly to the way he fought Frankie Edgar, he moved side to side at odd angles, didn't charge straight after the guy. I think his emotions were very high in that Conor McGregor fight that's very well known to a lot of fans inside the sport of MMA. So I think Aldo has to really go at Holloway in a different way. And if he doesn't, he could easily lose. Now, in the case of Max Holloway, he has the advantage in this fight. He has the size, he has the reach, but does he have the mentality to take on a guy like Jose Aldo with all the accolades Aldo has accrued over his MMA career? Can he go above and beyond and beat a guy mentally, like in his mind, like Conor did? Conor had no filter in his mind. Aldo did not intimidate him at all. Holloway hasn't been on this stage yet, and Conor was ready for this stage. I don't know necessarily if Holloway is ready for this stage. Not to say that he's not a great fighter. He definitely is. One of my favorite fighters in the UFC, to be honest with you. I love the style that he brings to the table. His fights with Conor, with Ricardo Lamas, very entertaining fights. And honestly, the guy that really gave Conor trouble outside of Nate Diaz was Max Holloway. He's a featherweight Nate Diaz. He reminds me a lot of Nate Diaz. So if Max brings that to the cage against Aldo and avoids the short hooks, avoids getting in too close, and fights Aldo at an angle and at a distance, I really think Aldo will be in serious trouble. I said Aldo, I meant to say Aldo. Well, Aldo will be in serious trouble. I'm picking Max Holloway for this fight. And the reason why is based on his reach advantage and his ability to fight at his pace. If he pushes the pace against Jose Aldo, if he makes it a dirty fight, I don't know if that's a fight that Aldo can win. I don't know if Jose Aldo is the same fighter that he was even 3-4 years ago. I think that this game, the featherweight division, the bantamweight division, the flyweight division, all three of those divisions are getting better, especially the lightweight division. But the lightweight division has always been one of the best in the UFC, dating back to the BJ Penn days. But the featherweight division is really, really progressing. We're seeing real talent in that division. Guys like Yair Rodriguez, who he was stomped in his last fight versus Frankie Edgar, but he's a talent. We haven't seen guys like this in the UFC featherweight division since the days of Conor. But before Conor, It was either Jose Aldo or Chad Mendez. Jose Aldo versus a wrestler. Now Jose Aldo is facing fighters that have just as good a stand-up as he does, if not better. And I'm going to go with Max Holloway for this fight. That was the third and final part of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you for tuning in. You can follow me on the Thomas Take Facebook page at Thomas Takeover. You can also add me on Twitter at Thomas Takeover. Follow me on Twitter at Thomas Takeover. And tune in to the Thomas Take on YouTube at the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. And last but not least, you can download the Spreaker.com app, which this podcast is streamed on, and get all access to the Thomas Take. Thank you. Take care.